If you wish to make a motion or a second, please state your name first. All votes on all items will be completed by a roll call to meet the standards for the state statute 13D.021. With that, I'd like to do the Pledge of Allegiance. We do have the flag behind me. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, so we have 8 items on our agenda. I don't know who's all going to be presenting, so I'll just start with the first one. And Mr. Linwood, you could maybe kind of fill in who's going to be talking at that time. So number 1 is the 2021 draft budget, and we'll let Mr. Linwood start.
Sure, I'll begin, and then we'll hand it off to Ms. Lynch, the city's finance director. Tonight, council, we have a vast agenda of items to go through tonight. We want to start with that 2021 draft budget. This is our initial draft budget. This is not to exceed. We want council feedback. A lot of this budget follows in line with that long-term plan, which we anticipate that we'll have some significant discussion about, and also playing into that those street funding options, MS4, some discussion about city software, our East Viking project racial equity and code enforcement to finish everything out. With that, I can turn it over to Ms. Lynch, and she can start, I guess, going through just our high level of that 2021 draft budget.
Yeah, am I able to share my screen, Rob?
I will turn it on, and if it's not,
okay,
you can now. You should be able to.
Perfect. So I'll kind of be walking us through the budget memo first, and as well as going into the long-term plan. So I'll share my screen just so we have visuals and I'm just not shouting numbers and percentages at you. I also have with me today Maggie from AEM. So she has helped me kind of behind the scenes develop this budget as well as your long-term plan. So she's here just to kind of observe our work session tonight. So first we're going to start on page 9 of the packet with the budget memo. For the tax levy summary, just high level, our total tax levy that we're proposing for 2021 has increased about $292,000 or 6.9% from 2020. With the preliminary tax capacity that we've received from Chisago County, we're looking at a tax rate that is increasing 0.5% up to about 44.09. There's multiple factors in the tax levy. The biggest driver of this increase this year is from the debt levy. 2020 A bonds were issued this year by the city. The first debt service payments will need to be made in 2021 unless a tax levy will be needed to help support that principal and interest payment. So you can see that that's a levy of about $226,000 in 2021. So that's a really big driver behind that increase. The other factors in that increase is the general levy. So the general levy helps support general operations of the city. That's increasing about 3%. It's also offset by a slight decrease in the capital levy. In this memo, the next couple of pages, we'll just kind of highlight some of the factors for that general levy increase of 3%. Whereas the capital and the debt levies we'll look at a little bit more in depth in the long-term plan, because those are all factored in there as well. So some of the key changes in this year's budget, first is the city's insurance premiums. So insurance premiums both for workers' compensation as well as property and liability insurance have increased pretty significantly, about $25,000 for 2021. As well as if you look at the budget on a departmental level, there are some large increases and decreases in different departments, but we really tried this year to allocate those premiums to the correct department. So that showed some large decreases offset by some large increases in other departments. So that's really the big factor behind the city clerk office. So that used to house a lot of that insurance premium. A lot of that got reallocated to the police department as well as parks. So it's not necessarily that those departments' insurance is going up quite that much. It's just getting allocated throughout departments. The other large factor within here is the staffing changes. So there is a staffing change in the police department. The crime analyst is going to go full-time halfway through 2021. There is a maintenance position that will be promoted to a lead, and that partially affects the general fund. Public works employees, though, are also allocated to the enterprise fund, so water and sewer. We have also factored in a COLA, or a cost of living increase for staff, as well as eligible employees will receive step increases. So those are really the big factors behind this increase. It's not a super large increase, $87,000 compared to 2020, or 2%. So that really sums it up for our general fund. Attached at the back of this memo, we are proposing to adopt formal budgets for the general fund as well as the enterprise fund, so water, sewer, and surface water. In the past, we had budgeted for every fund, but every fund will be considered in the long-term plan. So that's why we're just setting forth formal budgets for those 4 specific funds. But at this time, I'd be happy to take any questions specific really to the general fund. Otherwise, we can kind of roll into the long-term plan and kind of see big picture what this tax levy looks like and how we project it out into 2025 for the city.
All right, so what I'll do is I'll ask each council member if they do have any questions. We'll start with Member Luger.
No questions at this time.
Member Schilling?
I have no questions at this time.
Member Yeager?
None at this time.
All right, we'll continue then, Hannah. Thank you.
Yes. Okay, let me just find the long-term plan. I believe starts on page 32. And bear with us. So there is some viewing instructions if you are trying to follow along or viewing this document outside of this meeting. So just make sure you're looking at 2-page view. That way, when we have schedules, financial information, you'll be able to see everything on one screen. I plan to just walk through the long-term plan. We'll hold questions till the end. A lot of the long-term plan is intertwined and plays into each other. So I'm really going to try and hit on the key factors as well as introducing you guys to this plan. I know this is the first year the city of Wyoming has gone through this process. So first off, we list a lot of assumptions. So in order to project out financial activity for the next 5 years, we have to work off of a lot of assumptions. And those assumptions are mostly around, revenue and expenditure growth for the city in those 5 years. We give some key highlights as well as recommendations that I will hit on as we go through the separate schedules. In the financial section, let's see, it's not specifically spelled out, but there are 3 main schedules at the beginning of the long-term plan. This is the first one. So we'll look at what does the tax levy and the tax rate look like. The next one will be the cash balance. Cash balances for each fund for the whole city for the next 5 years. And then finally, what does the outstanding debt look like for the next 5 years? Those are really the 3 main schedules. We'll then go into some specific fund schedules, what the CIP looks like, some equipment and improvements that are planned, and really how those are going to be funded. So that's kind of how we're going to walk through this plan. Bear with me, it is a pretty large document. Okay, so really for me, this page in the long-term plan really is what tells the most story. So I like to start here down at the total city tax rate.
So what page are you on?
Yes, 45.
Thank you.
Yes. So on this page, 2019 and 2020 are actual amounts. So the city has already certified those tax levies to the county. So those exactly match what was certified. The 2021 column exactly matches your budget memo. And then 2022 and 2025 is what we anticipate for the next 4 years after 2021. But we're showing here, so you had a tax rate of about 45% in 2019. It had slightly decreased in 2020, and we are looking at a slight increase over the next couple years, and we'll kind of walk through what impacts that increase. In order to get at this tax rate, we look at the total taxes levied divided by the tax capacity. The total taxes levied has multiple factors, just like we looked at in the budget memo. We project out what's going to be needed for general operations for the next 5 years. Tax levies that will be needed to help support capital equipment and improvements. All of those levies that you'll need in order to pay your debt service payments on outstanding debt and possibly any future debt. And that brings you to your total taxes levied. For tax capacity, we have assumed that your tax capacity will grow about 3% each year, as well as a small factor for new homes that will help increase that tax capacity. One thing to note is we like to err on the side of conservatism in these plans. So your tax capacity, if it does increase higher than say 3% in any of these years, your tax rate will then be able to decrease. We just like to, err on that side of being conservative.
Hannah, I'm sorry, Hannah, I apologize. Can you kind of talk a little bit about the tax rate and tax capacities to make sure that we really make sure we have an understanding if council has any questions on those, how that factors into this plan?
Yeah, yep, for sure. Yeah, so like I said, to get to that tax rate, it's really just taking this, let's take 2021, for example, it's taking the total taxes levied, right? So for all of these purposes, for all of these funds, dividing it by the total tax capacity of the city. Good thing to note, total taxes levied, this is something City Council, you guys have control over, of adopting the total tax levy. One thing that you don't is tax capacity. So this is a number that we get from the county. The assessor's office really gives us that number. So right now we are working off a preliminary number from the county. The preliminary numbers are usually pretty close, but it could change, right? So once you take that total taxes levied divided by your total tax capacity, that's where we arrive at your tax rate. In this plan, we do break that tax rate down so you can kind of see the different factors of the tax rate. Is it general? Is it a capital levy or even a debt levy? Does that help, Rob?
Yeah, I think so. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's perfect. One thing to note in this plan, so you can see that there is a section for property taxes levied for future debt service. So there's nothing in here, but I would like to point out, and you'll see it in some later schedules, this long-term plan is built off of the assumption that you would only issue bonds one time in the next 5 years in 2025 for the 2025 street improvements. Other than that, we have not projected in any debt. We're trying to move the city kind of towards a pay-as-you-go system so that you're able to levy more on the front end for capital items, capital improvements, instead of having to levy so much to pay debt for previous improvements. One thing to note too, as we go through this plan, we have considered all city CIP and activity in this plan except for building needs. So you guys are still currently going through your building needs assessment. So none of that is incorporated in this plan. I would anticipate anything that comes out of that plan that you would also possibly have to bond for those improvements. Sorry, I always do that, the 2-page view. So let's kind of look at, so we can see, this tax rate that we have projected out. We are increasing a little bit, but we're hoping that eventually, if this, if we can move towards more of a pay-as-you-go system, that we won't have to levy almost this $1 million each year for debt service, and instead that levy can move towards levying for capital in the year that it's needed. We do have a schedule of annual cash balances. So this shows every fund of the city. Your 2019 column matches your annual audit. We've also projected out to 2025. You can see that the cash balance does decrease. We do look at using reserves efficiently in this plan so that we are first using our reserves if they're available and then implementing the tax levy if needed. There are a few funds with the yellow dot. So we're just saying, you know, we have adequate reserve levels, but maybe something to watch, but nothing alarming. You know, in the capital projects, you can just see that balance decreases a little bit, but what you don't see on this plan is what is anticipated for 2026. For water and sewer, we also recommend always analyzing those rates, and that's something that the City of Wyoming does do. So that's just what we're saying there. For water and sewer, continue to analyze rates on a regular basis. Make sure that you're able to cover operations and capital with those water and sewer rates. One thing we do recommend is in surface water. So in surface water, we have projected a new employee would be partially needed there. That's another agenda item. We'll go into more detail in this workshop, as well as there's CIP items needed in surface water. And with the current rates in that fund, it's not able to afford those improvements. And that's why you can see that, you know, we kind of recommend looking at those rates in that fund. One of our other high-level schedules we have here is your outstanding debt. So in here, you can see this is all of the city's current debt that we have outstanding, as well as we have modeled in this potential new debt. So the only new debt we're showing in this plan would be just over $2 million in 2025 for the street improvement costs. There also is a schedule, so we'll go through for some individual funds. We'll show you what the CIP looks like for those funds, as well as the revenue and expenditures, how we're going to afford those. If there's transfers in or transfers out shown, this schedule can be helpful if you're ever curious, well, where's that transfer coming from or where is it going to? This kind of helps give that full view. There are a couple that we may skip over if they don't have any CIP items, but you can feel free, we can get back to them if you have any questions at the end. The first one we'll really dive into is the Capital Equipment Fund. So this is actually the fund that we created earlier this year. We closed all of the separate 800 CIP funds for each department in order to make this Capital Equipment Fund. So this is a really good view. So in one fund, we're able to show you all of the capital equipment for the city. I should say governmental capital equipment. If it's water or sewer or surface water, those will be purchased in those respective funds. But this is all of the equipment that will be needed on the governmental side for the city through 2025. You can see it separated by department, as well as the cost in the year that we plan for those. So this is kind of how our plan works. So first, for each fund that we present, we'll show you the CIP. If you flip to the second fund or the second page, sometimes it's able to fit all on one page. This is kind of how we plan to afford that CIP. So really this middle section, total expenditures, matches the first page. So that's really just bringing it down. It does give you totals by department if you're curious. So you can see what fire's purchasing, what public works decides to purchase. But what this really tells you is how we're going to fund these capital equipment or improvements. So this fund has really two main funding sources. So the first is property taxes. So you can see that we have a property tax levy scheduled out to 2025. This levy is also the same one shown on that first page when we kind of detail out your total levy. On each fund, we show you interest on investments, right? So that's one of our assumptions, about a 1% interest rate, being conservative on cash balances there. In this fund, intergovernmental, the city has dedicated its LGA or local government aid to capital items. So this is our projection for LGA in the next 5 years to help afford these capital purchases. You can see that we utilize this cash balance down here, as well as there are some sale of fixed assets that do help contribute to this fund. Many of these funds have a debt service related activity at the bottom, although since we really have not modeled in much debt at all, that will be blank for almost all of these funds. So this is showing you that with the tax levy we have provided, we believe that the city can purchase all of its CIP without issuing any bonds through 2025. I did it again. We'll go back to 2-page view. The Park Acquisition Fund, you can see the CIP here. There's the Swenson Park DNR matching grant. So this would be the city's portion of that project, as well as at a previous budget work session, there had been discussion about this $25,000 per year for parks. There have been some parks plugged in here, but that could always change depending on priorities. But we do have that $25,000 annually in this park fund. This park fund previously had a property tax levy, although we believe it's mostly funded here by transfers in. These transfers in are from the city's gambling fund. The gambling fund, those dollars are restricted. They can only be used for certain things. Some of those things include park equipment, park improvements, as well as I believe that they could also purchase some public safety equipment as well. So we thought it would be beneficial to use some of the city's current reserves to help with these park improvements instead of continuing a levy in this fund. Currently in trail development, there's no CIP items, so we'll just kind of skip over this fund quick. The city does have an MSA fund. So the city's MSA fund really accounts for the city's municipal state aid that is received for maintenance. So these are maintenance projects, crack and seal coating out through 2025 that is planned to use those state aid dollars. You can see here that intergovernmental, we do project out that state aid, as well as we do show us transfer out in 2024. You'll see that on the next page where we're anticipating using some of that for street construction or reconstruction projects. In the city's street replacement fund, Fund 408, we don't have necessarily the detail behind the CIP. I know that is available for you, but we have taken the city's CIP and the street projects planned out through 2025 and detailed the total amounts here. In this fund, we're really showing multiple funding sources for all of these street projects. So with this, these funding sources, we believe that the city would be able to complete all of these street improvement projects through 2025 while only issuing bonds in for that 2025 project. But let's kind of walk through some of these financing sources. So we do anticipate starting to implement a specific levy for street improvement, right? So we're hoping that once the city kind of moves away from issuing bonds for street improvements, you can instead, you don't have to have a debt levy to pay the principal and interest, but you can instead send that levy straight to the street fund. In that year, you can, build up reserves, use your reserves, levy when you need to, and move to that pay as you go system. We have modeled out special assessments. So currently there are special assessments that are still out there that the city is collecting. So we've modeled out the proceeds for those. One big thing that we do have in here, and it's also listed on our recommendations page on that first page of the long-term plan, is we have modeled in franchise fees. I know that franchise fees were explored, I believe, a couple years ago by the city. So we have taken one of those scenarios and plugged in what we believe the city would receive in revenue if they implemented a franchise fee starting in 2021. A couple other funding sources is MSA, so Municipal State Aid for Construction Projects. So we've modeled in here the city's annual allotments that we believe they would be able to use towards MSA eligible projects, as well as some state bridge bond funding. We have that in 2022, so up above, we anticipate we put that project in 2022 for expenditures, so we're matching the revenues in 2022, although that could possibly move to a different year. A couple other financing sources for this fund. We are showing a significant transfer in 2022. So instead of issuing bonds, we're proposing that the city use some of its reserves in its capital revolving fund. And so those funds would just be transferred into the street replacement fund to help complete these street projects. Again, we're showing that transfer in from the MSA maintenance fund. So we're just using some of those other state aid dollars for some 2024 projects. You can see you issued bonds in 2020, as well as we have some bonds modeled in for 2025. With your capital revolving fund, Fund 409, this is not a fund that we would put anticipated expenditures in, but we do like to show kind of the cash balance in here, as well as if we plan to transfer in or out any of those proceeds. So this fund, I believe it was created in 2018, could be 2017, forgive me if I'm wrong. And this was really built off of some of those, that large general fund reserve that the city had been carrying. So it was really transferred in here in order to get a better idea of some of these reserves that are available for capital items. In 2019, the city did have a general fund budget surplus where they transferred in $950,000 into this fund. So really, there is a little bit of interfund loan activity. So there was a dump truck purchased and that was purchased and it will be paid back to this fund over a number of years. But other than that, the only significant activity that we've put in here is that transfer out for street replacement. So we're definitely not anticipating to use all of it, but we are looking to use a big portion of it. One thing we also do in here is, again, we want to be conservative. So we have not anticipated any more transfers in, although you could have transfers in depending on general fund performance in the next couple years. The gambling fund, again, we don't have anything scheduled to be purchased out of this fund, although we are showing the purchases in that other park fund, right? So the $25,000 per year out through 2025. And then we're just showing that this fund is helping to fund those improvements with the transfer out. This fund does get gambling proceeds. So it would all depend on those gambling proceeds that come into this fund. But again, utilizing the cash in this fund, but definitely not draining out those cash reserves. The next couple, so water and sewer, I won't dive too deep into these. Like I said, water and sewer, we did take into account both the CIP that city staff provided, as well as the city's current rate study. So the CIP items are listed on the first page, as well as operational and capital funding is shown on this statement of cash flows. And we believe this is following in line with the city's current rate study, but definitely recommend regularly looking at those rates. Same with the sewer fund. We've detailed out that CIP, but still this fund is, the statement of cash flows is looking in line with that rate study. And finally, I had mentioned it earlier, but the surface water fund, there are some CIP items scheduled in here. If we flip to the second page, Let's just kind of quick walk through kind of what all these lines mean, since there isn't a current rate study that we could really compare this one to. So this first, receipts from customers and users, we're projecting out here if rates were not increased. This is the current revenue that we project to receive out through 2025. For payments to suppliers and employees, you can kind of see a little jump in 2021. That would be that new employee that is currently in the budget. That employee is split equally between water, sewer, and the surface water fund. So the surface water fund, this jump here, about $25,000, is due to a third of an employee's wages and benefits. You can also see here, so we're kind of pulling in that CIP, the purchases of capital equipment and improvements. And we're showing down here, so there is a cash deficit. So in order for some of these CIP items, as well as this employee, to be afforded in this fund, we would need to look at rates in here, or some other funding source. But other than that, I know it was really high level and kind of quick, but I would be more than happy to take any questions on the long-term plan.
All right, again, well, thank you, Hannah. That's a lot of numbers.
It is. And can I make one more quick statement that I forgot? So the long-term plan, we work through these with many different cities. And just remember that we'd never ask you to formally adopt this, right? It's kind of like a rate study. It's a guide that you guys can use for the next 5 years, but by no means will you ever say we're locking this in stone. This is what we're going to do. It's just a really good guide for both city as well as, mayor and council to use going forward. This is a draft. So we're definitely looking at input, and we'll look at modifying this over the next couple months in order to, kind of finalize it with your final budget.
All right. So council members, I will go around the room, ask each of you if there are any questions that you might have. We will start with member Schilling.
I actually have no questions.
All right. We will go to member Yeager.
I have a few questions. In the park fund, the 25,000, that is what Chuck was requesting for equipment maintenance.
I will let Chuck or Kelly elaborate on that.
Yes, Councilman Yeager, yes, that's what we had ran by the Park Advisory Committee as a starting number, because we had only had 10,000, and we estimated over 20 years of replacing all the park equipment.
Right. But that's what you were talking about, and that's where that 25,000 comes from.
Yes, ma'am.
And that would be out of the general levy.
Nope. So that is actually, the expenditures will come out of the Park Acquisition Fund 404, and it will be funded by the gambling fund.
Oh, okay. I don't think we got into that. Okay. And then on the capital expenditures, when I saw for 2021, there's a levy of 250,000 and an LGA of about 302,000, leaving a little bit of a shortfall. Where's that shortfall going to come from?
What page are we looking at when we're looking at those amounts? Is it this one on page 59?
No, it's the longer one that says, where you said we have it all in one fund. Here is it broken out. So
yep. So this is the capital, this fund.
Yeah, when you go down, 2021 estimated amounts 564,000.
Yep.
All right, so if you have a levy of 250,000 and an LGA of 302,000, you're still about 12,000 short.
So we actually have LGA projected at 200,000, although I know that LGA came out today, so we do have to update that. If we are short, the long-term plan looks at utilizing cash reserves. So you can see here that cash reserves would be used in this fund. We kind of help to then make the levy more flat, so you don't see quite as much as this of the up and down. That's where we're looking at using those cash reserves.
I think our 2021 estimate LGA came out at about 321,000 approximately. So that's,
Okay, I was just taking the number off your Friday memo.
I think I believe it was 321 for 21. If I'm,
Yes, we weren't sure about LGA until about, like Rob said, 3 o'clock today. So we went conservative in the plan. So it will actually help the outlook of this fund by updating that in the next draft.
Okay, and so I was looking at the League of Minnesota Cities Bulletin. They talk about the huge budget deficit and the possibility of LGA being cut as soon as December 2020. So what happens if the LGA gets cut?
So in here, we're right now we're looking at a conservative amount of LGA. So if it gets cut by a certain percentage, we are being conservative right now. If it was cut completely, then the city would have to look at other funding sources for its capital equipment fund.
Okay,
I think that's been consistent with our use of LGA. That's why we utilize it the way we do, that it doesn't just go into our reserve funds, that we actually put it to work for those capital improvement purchases, because they are one-time purchases. And then as we've discussed with the council, in a scenario where that would be reduced or a reduction or not at all, that we would have to adjust appropriately.
right. So we would start cutting capital expenditures if we had our LGA cut, right?
We would have to go through and try to identify, right, the most important of those capital expenditures.
I think that's all I have.
All right, thank you. Member Luker.
I have no questions at this time.
All right, thank you. And I have no questions as well. So good presentation. Does that bring us down to number 3 on our agenda?
If council has no other questions on that long-term plan, we certainly we'll start talking a little more about that plan, and as Ms. Lynch just went through that, and we can talk a little bit about those street funding options. Ms. Lynch had shown that long-term plan a combination to look at our future street projects. We worked with council at previous work sessions to identify that next 5 years of street projects and what they would look like. And as Ms. Lynch had talked about, we're looking at trying to move forward with paying those projects up front and not continuing to have to issue debt for those projects. Our debt ratio right now has been identified that it's the debt ratio is getting a little high. It was noted by Moody's in our last rating that it was a little high. So we're looking at taking this approach as a draft proposal to the council. The one item that she did speak about in this is this long-term plan would have a component of franchise fees. I know this is something that we brought up once before at the council to get some feedback. Actually, Ms. Colette Jurek is here tonight from Xcel Energy, and she was going to talk a little bit about the process, I think, of those funds and give the council a little background. Some of you were here and we talked about that in 2017. Some of you were not, just to make sure the council understands it. And if we were to look at this harder, what we would take into consideration. And we also have some updated numbers that Xcel pulled together, what that would look like. Ms. Jurek, Colette?
Yes.
Would you be willing to give the council, and I have a document I can share with the council in regards to those updated numbers you gave, but could you give the council a little bit about the background of the process of those franchise fees and other municipalities that utilize them?
Yes, absolutely. So Xcel Energy can work with local government units to implement a franchise fee collection. Rob gave me kind of a ballpark figure of like $275,000 that he would like to potentially raise on an annual basis. So I put together 4 options for you to take a look at. Xcel Energy would collect the money. We don't retain any of it. We collect it on a monthly basis. And then it gets transmitted back to the city on a quarterly basis. Okay, Rob's going to pull it up. That's great. I also worked with my counterpart at Connexus Energy to get their number that they so you can see the 4 options listed there with the grand totals listed at the very bottom. And I just kind of wanted, a lot of people will ask, especially with the electric customer classification, kind of what that means. So honestly, we have residential customers, and then we have what we call small C&I non-demand customers. And that would be, an example of that would be like a small retail or office building that uses less than 25 kW of electricity per month. Then there's a small C&I demand that would use 25 kW or greater. A good example of that would be a more energy intensive user such as a restaurant. And then obviously our large C&I would be, an example would be like a manufacturing business. Years ago, Xcel Energy collected franchise fees as a percent of what our gross revenue base is in the community. Back in the early 2000s, when legislature cut back on state government aid, our company was approached a large quantity of local government units interested in implementing franchise fee options. So our leadership took some time to kind of look at, investigate that, and decided at that time that we would go to what we call a flat fee per month, which takes out the weather variations, so that if we're to have a very hot, muggy spell in the summer months, people wouldn't be paying higher franchise fees that month and penalized for the amount of electricity that they use. So this guaranteed revenue stream for your city that takes out those weather factors, or possibly people who had less than energy efficient appliances and or houses or buildings. So this is a way we can meet the revenue stream that the city repairs and provides a consistent collection amount for your community. So all 4 options have been approved by Xcel Energy and Connexus Energy. So that $270,000 figure, I can't hit it exactly, but as you can see, probably option B comes the closest to what you were looking for in terms of an annual collection amount. So with that, are there any questions about it?
All right, thank you, Colette. I will ask each council member as we can go around the room. Member Yeager.
For residential, between option B and option C, the residential is the same. The difference is increases in commercial rates.
Correct.
Okay, that's it. Thank you.
All right, Member Schilling.
I have no questions.
Member Schilling, can I ask you a question? Is this something that's done in West St. Paul?
I believe we do, actually. And they actually did this, I think, up in Ely in my previous city as well.
Okay, thank you. Member Luker?
No questions.
And I don't have any, well, I will ask one question. Does this also include nonprofits, churches, that sort of thing,
Yes.
they be paying as well?
Yes.
So in all reality, every household, every business, it doesn't matter. Everybody actually that uses our roads will be helping to take care of them.
That'd be correct, Mayor. No one would be, these are applicable to any business, nonprofit, residents in the city. Mr. Provided this was largely based off of our long-term plan, looking at some potential funding options. I can certainly give the council more background too on the list of municipalities, not only in the Twin Cities, but also in Chisago County, et cetera, that utilize this as an option. It is an option, but that's, I think tonight staff was seeking as part of that long-term plan, some feedback from the council if this is something that we want to explore further, and staff can look into the implications of that and the different processes that we have to go forward with if this was under consideration.
Okay, Mr. Linwood, is this something that we have to make it a dedicated fund, correct? So when we go to the state or we go to wherever for them to, okay, we need to say it is for X or it is for roads or whatever. So it has to be dedicated specifically for that. We cannot dip into it for any reason outside of what it is dedicated for.
Right, you would want to dedicate it for what it is. Most communities use it for street funding, but there are other uses too. And Ms. Jurek, maybe you can talk about that. Sometimes you'll see parks, trails, things like that. But I think the large component would certainly be for street funding. And I don't know if you would have anything to add to that at all, Ms. Jurek, as far as the use.
Yeah, majority of the franchise implementation, and then some cities who already have been collecting a franchise fee sometimes will return and ask for it to be modified or increased, which we're willing to work with communities to. The majority, I would say, of the ones that I've done in the last 5 years have all been used for road reconstruction. A lot of cities do set it up for their parks, trails, systems. I've actually had who have designated that money for undergrounding projects for electrical lines. So there have been a variety of uses for the collection amount.
Thank you. And I believe Forest Lake is at about $10.
I can look that up for you.
Yeah, that would be great. I hear a lot of rumblings about some different cities, but that one is the highest that I've heard so far, is roughly $10, or did I hear 12? I don't know, but I want to say it was 10.
I can provide, and we can provide more information on the different cities and what they utilize between that difference between the residential and the gas and what that.
So I can tell you that Forest Lake on the electric side charges their residential customers $4, and on the gas side it's $3.
Oh, so not 10.
It's 7 total, but I would caution you, and because I provided that to Rob of what other cities are collecting. It's not always a comparison of apples to apples. Every city's customer base for electric and gas customers varies slightly. There's different percentages of customers in each of these categories. So just be cautious as a warning that comparing what you're charging doesn't necessarily equate to what another city is collecting in those different rate classifications.
And Colette, do you think that most, it's hard to say, but most cities are doing something like this, or half the cities? Is there any type of, and Mr. Linwood, it's great for us to see.
Yeah, my guesstimate would be probably about maybe 30% of the communities that we serve collect a franchise fee. And most cities, when they initiate a fee collection, generally fall in the range of like 2 to 3% of our collecting, as a flat fee, but it equates to 2 to 3% of our gross revenues. And all of these options are in that range. They go from 2.6% on option A all the way up to like 3.2% for option D. So you're right kind of in the ballpark of what our other communities are collecting.
Okay, thank you. I think I was the last one on those questions. So Mr. Linwood, you would provide just some other cities and.
Yes, I certainly can. And this is something that once implemented too, it's something that can be adjusted annually if the council, if it was something we implemented and it was something that we felt adjustment, it can be adjusted from year to year.
Okay, thank you.
The slide that we have up right now, can Rob send it to us?
I can send it, sure.
Thanks.
Yep.
All right, so if there are no more questions with that, we can move on to number 4 on our agenda, which is the MSA4 and stormwater funds.
And just to give council some background, this is largely based off Mrs. Lynch and that she went through that long-term plan, but Public Works Superintendent Almgel has prepared a presentation for the council to go through what just it means. And most of you are familiar that we've gone through that MS4 process and that the permitting that's necessary, but we just want to give council a refresher and to talk about that and see what it is actually that the city has to do to maintain that permit. So he's going to have just a brief presentation to go through some of that.
All right, thank you, Rob. I'm going to share my screen here. Good evening, Mayor and council members. My first Zoom meetings
Good job.
with a PowerPoint, so this will be interesting. All right. So the NPDES and the MS4 permit, both sewer, sanitary sewer and stormwater have an NPDES permit, and that I always associate that with the EPA. And then the MS4 stands for Municipal Separate Stormwater Systems. And so in previous years, many years ago, sewer and stormwater were combined, but now they're separated into the 2 different categories, which would be an MS4. The stormwater program for MS4s is designed to reduce the amount of sediment and pollutants that enter surface and groundwater from stormwater systems to the maximum extent practicable. Stormwater discharges associated with MS4s are regulated through the use of NPDES permits. Through this permit, the owner or operator, which would be the city, is required to develop a stormwater pollution prevention program, which is called SWIP, and we do have one, that incorporates the best management practices, and you'll see that abbreviation BMPs throughout the presentation, applicable to their MS4. Why does it matter? According to the EPA, stormwater runoff is a leading source of water pollution. MS4 reduction of pollutants discharges to stormwater. It's the maximum extent practicable. What is stormwater? Stormwater runoff is rain or snow melt that flows over land and does not infiltrate into the ground. As stormwater runoff flows across surfaces, it picks up trash, debris, pollutants such as soil, grease, etc. along the way. For construction sites, sediment movement from the site is the primary stormwater pollutant and is considered an illicit discharge. Anything in the street and ditches is litter, pesticides, fertilizer, grass clippings end up in your local lakes and rivers. What is an MS4? An MS4 is a conveyance of system of conveyances such as roads with drainage systems, municipal streets, catch basins, curbs, gutters, ditches, man-made channels, and storm drains. And why this is important is all these are part of the MS4, all these entities in this one paragraph. Is owned and operated by the state, city, or town, in our case, the city. And it's designated for use for collecting or conveying stormwater, which is not a combined sewer. And that's what we talked about before. Now it's all separated, stormwater from sanitary sewer. Why are we a MS4? Would be the last choice because our population is at least 5,000 and the system discharges to specifically classified bodies of water which would be like in a watershed district. Water, doesn't mean the waters have to be impaired, but that is one factor also. Then you have 6 minimum control measures. These are the documentation of the 6 categories that we have to do for our permit. So we have public education and outreach, public participation and involvement, illicit discharge detection and elimination, construction site stormwater runoff control, post-construction stormwater management, pollution prevention and good housekeeping for municipal operations. So if we go through these, public education and outreach, that's where we focus on areas without stormwater treatment, areas adjacent to water bodies. All of this kind of stuff here, and this illicit discharges, and working with the Comfort Lake Watershed District. A lot of this we do with social media, newsletters. We also do mailings to residents and stuff if they are putting their grass clippings in the streets. And then our measure 2, annual public meeting, and then document all the requests and questions. This is done by WSB in November or December of every year. They do a good job with it. And then we have illicit discharge detection and elimination. This is through ordinance. We also train to detect anything running. It could be anything from an actual development, all the sediment running into our storm sewer, to a garbage truck blew a hydraulic hose. We would have to detain from getting in the storm, and then it'd have to be cleaned up properly. The most important thing here is documentation of what you did and how it was resolved. Then we have a construction site, stormwater runoff control. This here is also where Public Works starts to get more involved. Fred and Tom do a great job in this whole area of inspection and determining, on a regular basis. We don't necessarily do it daily, as it says here. If you have like over 0.5, a half inch of rain, it is Fred and Tom are out about it in the developments. Public Works is doing water and sewer inspections, and currently that's how we monitor what's going on and cite people who have problems out there. Again, we need to do a better job documenting, not so much documenting, but putting it all in one spot so that it's easy to find in case of an audit. And then post-construction, this is where what I'm talking most about today. This is where it's all Public Works now we're getting into. So we have this post-construction stormwater runoff control. So you have long-term maintenance. So the city, we're out conducting inspections, which we do. We perform maintenance and assess the cost to maintain all the new structures that are going in, which be rain gardens, maybe similar to the library. If we had more of them, Public Works would have to clean them, instead of volunteers. Infiltration basins are going in now. They are mostly made up of drain tile, and someday we'll have to get out there. You drive in between the drain tile and go to the cleanouts with a bobcat and an easement reel, it's called, that's hooked to your Vector truck, and you jet out and clean all the drain tile lines. We have not did one of these yet. And then storm ponds, of course, as we'll get into more here. We use swamp with WSP to determine the depth of the sediment that's getting in stormwater ponds. But at some point we have to assess how much it costs to maintain all this, and that's what a good part of what we're doing tonight. And then step 6 is SWAMP, which is a stormwater asset management program. And that is we have purchased this from WSB. And with SWAMP, we will be able to tell when the pond is ready for, the complete pond is ready to be dredged, which is it can be very expensive depending on the contaminants inside of it. Inspections, again, BMPs annually, that is your catch basins and sumps. Currently, we're not doing this annually. We don't have a Vector truck or something for stormwater and the personnel. And then we have outfalls once per permit cycle. Permit is 5 years long, so you could also say that 20% of the outfalls and ponds a year is the number we use. And we are doing inspections of them, and then we are writing down what needs to be done. And then you have the training, which we have certified operators. We go to SALT training classes, and then documentation we have with SWAMP, and we have a module for stormwater. Again, all the inspections are being completed. And so that brings us into what's being done and what still needs to be done. So Wyoming we're meeting the basic requirements of the permit where we do the inspections, we figure out what we need to do, and that's where it stops. So all the paperwork gets submitted by WSP and it's legitimate. I mean, we are doing the work, except for the maintenance after the inspections. We have salt reduction. We have through Brian, which we have completed, and we're beginning documentation of items in the system, which was that one where they had culverts, curbs, streets, all of that stuff. We're starting to document now. Necessary activities. Again, maintenance not being addressed after inspections. So if you GISing it would be a big part of this new employee and stuff that we need to do. So we have safer culverts and missing infrastructure. And a good example of this would be kind of tell you a process. Like say you think of a culvert that goes underneath the street is a pretty simple fix. You dig up the street and put the culvert in. But in a watershed district, we would start with engineering, getting a watershed permit to replace the culvert. Then you'd have engineering shoot the grade of that culvert because it has to go back in exactly where it was. And then we'd go get 3 estimates to dig out this culvert because you have to dam up this water. And so you need a big excavator to do that. And then after that estimate comes in and all the permits come in, we'd do the dig, put the new culvert in, then you put this ground back in, but then you have to put your road section back in, then the blacktop, and then the watershed district would come out and check to see how you did. And so that whole process, just for one culvert that crosses the road, is like say $20,000 area. So I want to give you an idea of like we have many culverts. Ditch cleaning, we currently do not do, but we have been doing some with street projects, excuse me. Same with tree removal in stormwater areas. Catch it basin repairs, they can run about $775 a repair. We usually would budget like 20 a year to keep up with them all. We don't have a budget money for that. And then equipment that Hannah was talking about, it's very expensive, but we can share some of it with the sanitary sewer, like a Vector truck, a mini excavator. And that's where we went with that. But now, as of yesterday, Mark had contacted me from WSP that the watershed district is going to write a grant for us for a street sweeper, and hope like they did for Forest Lake, and hopefully we will get that grant. And it's an 80-20 grant, and so. But and to give you an idea, then if we had the equipment, you have to do enhanced street sweeping to get the equipment, which is in the watershed district area. And so instead of spring and fall like we do now, maybe you do 6 sweepings a year, which is all great because it's saving your ponds. But to do the whole city, it takes 7 days with a street sweeper. And so just to give you an idea of the labor involved if we did get the street sweeper, that's good news. The testing of ponds, at some point we'll start that where there's 3 levels of carcinogens. I mean, there's one level that has no carcinogens. You can get rid of that dredging stuff anywhere. And then there's one with so many amounts of carcinogens that go get screened out and stuff. And then the third one, if it has too many, that has to go to like a place like Demcon, and that gets very expensive. And dredging is also included like the inlets of a stormwater pond, like the previous picture we had there. It creates like a sandbar by the inlets when the water flows in all the time. So when after we do our inspections, we document that that's what we need to do. We need to clean that one out by the inlet. So to kind of tell you how that happens, you pull a mini excavator up to the edge of the culvert. As far out as that mini excavator reaches, you dig out that material, load it in a truck and get it out of there. And you want to test it to make sure we know where it goes. And then dredging is also, the stormwater ponds are rated when they're built for so much water to go through them. And as they fill up, you reduce the amount of water that it can handle. And so that's what SWAMP does. It tells engineering when we need to do a dredging project. And then, of course, water reuse. We want the water to be nice and for our children and stuff, and that's an ethical question. So our permit is relatively new. I think this is the 5th year, but you can see all the additional services we have. Public Works has had no new staff added in our Public Works department for 12 years. And I asked Fred, that was when the annexation started. One of the main functions of the new employee would be MS4 activities. The new employee is made up of 1/3 sewer, 1/3 water, and 1/3 storm. The sewer and water from the rate study can afford the employee's cost, but stormwater does not currently have the ability to cover that. And so here's a CIP chart. So as you see, this will be annually putting in money for like pond dredging, water reuse. So say you had a $60,000 project, the money would eventually be there. Vector truck, the same thing, we go by year, but a Vector truck is like $350,000 to $500,000. So half of this would be on the sewer. A street sweeper, these might go away then if we did get a grant, and that could help employee on employee. And then our cost for contracted services would also help for a new employee on that one. And then we went to the water fees for our neighboring cities. And this is a breakdown I took off of their websites. And so we're paying 67 cents a month, which is $2 a quarter. North Branch is at $5.15. Lindstrom's at $5.66. Stacy is $3.50 per month. Forest Lake is $3.34 per month. So the stormwater maintenance activities continue to increase, of course, due to the permit. It's necessary that the city documents these activities and systems, which we need to do a better job on that. Not only is the documentation required, it is necessary to maintain and repair the stormwater systems. And again, if you had a culvert, good example, and you GIS'd it and you wrote down the condition of it, and you know in 2 years it needs to be fixed, we have something to budget with. If the city does not maintain the systems in the MS4, there's a potential that we could be fined by the MPCA. Again, it's documentation. You've heard that documentation. That helps a lot on this one. With increasing duties and activities, staff is requesting that the city council consider a stormwater utility study to help identify the necessary future revenues to maintain the city's stormwater system and the MS4 permit compliance. And that's what I have for PowerPoint.
Great PowerPoint, Chuck. That's a lot to have to go through.
Thank you.
It's a lot of information. I think most of the people, whether it's in our city or other cities, don't quite understand the MS4 and why we have it and what's all involved. It's very complicated. And my question would be this is a state requirement, correct?
It's a federal MPDES permit, and then the MPC does it with the MS4 permit.
Okay, so we have no choice. We have to do it. We have to be able to fund it.
Correct.
Okay. So basically, as we say, it's an unfunded mandate coming from the federal government.
Correct.
Correct. All right. Mr. Linwood, did you have anything to add to that?
I think we'd like to talk to the council. I think seeing some of the things that we are necessary to have completed, as Mr. Elmsdale has outlined, I think I'd like some feedback from the council if possible, if they would be in favor of at least looking at a rate study for that stormwater. I know the stormwater discussion, we didn't include it in our last utility rate, but I think looking at some of the different maintenance items and repairs and documentation and things that come along with this, I think to try to be able to make sure that we're in compliance with this permit, it would be pertinent to take a look at that rate and actually have a rate study completed for that stormwater utility. And I just was hoping for some feedback on council about that idea.
Okay, and I just want to ask one more question. I believe, Mr. Elmsdale, you said that there is a fine if we do not comply with all the rules?
That's correct, Mayor. Like say you identified in your inspection that the pond is overflowing with sediment and you just never did nothing to fix it, they would look at something like that. But again, if you have a really good documentation and like documentation of this meeting, everything you could think of, they work with you. They understand the challenges.
Okay, but if we're not doing anything, we're not able to fund it or not able to do anything, then we're leaving ourselves at risk.
Right. So part of the permit says you need to look at the funding of the infrastructure. And so that's what we're doing. So we're following the permit. We're not doing nothing illegal. But you know, we have to follow through for the good of our water too, the water quality.
Okay, so then the question then to council is whether we want to do a rate study, if we're in favor of that. Is that correct, Mr. Linwood?
We would. I'd like just some consensus. We would bring it to council for a formal action at a upcoming council meeting, but just to have some discussion and if there is a consensus to move forward with that.
All right, sounds good. We will start with Member Yeager.
Would this rate study be sent out for RFP like we did the utility study?
We could, I don't anticipate the cost being as significant as that utility, but that would certainly be something if the council wants to discuss, we certainly could do it via RFP, yes.
Okay, because my concern was years ago when we expanded the stormwater fee to the former township areas, it was very contentious, and some of the projections for income projections were a bit too rosy and did not quite match reality. So I would, if we were to do a rate study, it's still fresh in the minds of a lot of people, and I would like to make sure that the projections are fairly accurate.
Yeah, I think, I think there's obviously multiple companies that are capable of rate studies. I think obviously the last one we had completed for our sewer and water was completed by formerly Springstead, now Baker Tilly. And I think based on right now with our long-term plan and audits, right now that rate study has been so far fairly accurate and done well. So like I said, I think there are capable companies out there to complete those accurately, and not only them, others as well.
Okay. That's all I have.
All right, thank you. Member Luker?
I'm in favor of an accurate rate study as well.
Okay, great. All right, Member Schilling?
I'm actually very in favor of a rate study because I think this is something that we need to address fairly quickly, to be honest with you, because I'm also dealing with this where I'm currently employed as well. So.
All right, sounds good. I'm in favor. I guess I would be very disappointed if we work with consultants that give us inaccurate information. So we seem to, over the course of the last 4 years, have some great consultants that we trust. So I think an accurate study would definitely be beneficial. And I think that we probably have some of those relationships to do that. So Mr. Linwood, I think we're in agreement from council that to go ahead with to bring forth a more, what do I want to say, permanent, not permanent, what word am I looking for, to the council?
we'll bring an action item to the council at the next meeting to review that in our RFP style, if that's what the council would like.
All right, that sounds like that's something we need to do.
Okay. Thank you, appreciate it.
All right, and Chuck, again, you did a great job. That's not a fun one to present on.
Thank you.
So, all right, the next one is number 5 is city software, and I do not know who's doing that.
I'll start that conversation, Mayor. Mayor, members of the council, that the software is something that we had brought up with the council at previous budget work sessions. We had looked at the end of last year, some different ones that we're seeing other municipalities start to use, and really the one that stood out to staff and conversation with other cities and some conversations with our finance director in the use of it was the BS&A software. This is a citywide software that would be include all of our financial needs, payroll, point of sale, building inspections, community development, human resources, and last but not least, utility billing. I think this is an important component of this conversation. We would look to bring back in-house utility billing with the purchase and the implementation of this software. Currently, the city utilizes, utilize for these different features, a software called Banyan that for some of them more the finance and the payroll and some of those items not really capable of a lot of those. We continue to have issues with Banyan. We can continue to hear other cities that are stopping to utilize them. We have maintenance issues with it. We have crashes with it. We have customer service support that is extremely lacking. And it's become problematic as we try to do business and serve our businesses and residents. The other item that in part of this is that we currently contract with a third outside entity, Opus 21, for the city's actual billing and tracking of accounts. We would look to discontinue that relationship with Opus if we did move forward with this software. There obviously is a cost with Opus. Annually, we're approximately $35,000 that we pay Opus for our utility billing needs. That would be brought back in-house, and then we would utilize that position that right now we're trying to fill, and that's that utility billing clerk administrative assistant position for those duties. We've been having some conversations with BS&A and looking at timing for this. I gave the council some information again that you have seen before in regards to the proposal from BS&A, and then also a proposal from AEM, is they identify that there is a lot of different things to take in consideration as far as mapping of those accounts and how we would begin to bring this together. The other component is the timing on this. There is some impact to this, whether when we do it, because we want to be thoughtful in regards to our pre-audit activities and our actual audit, that we're not going through a new software implementation that would be disruptive to both our staff, AEM, or our city auditors. So that's something that we looked at. I provided the council with a timeline that actually I should say was provided by Ms. Lynch from AEM, that we would, if we were to look at moving forward with the software in 2020, we have it scheduled for 2021. We could start that probably as soon if this was something the council wanted to move forward on, as soon as 9/7. I have had conversations with BS&A too, and they are confident that this timeline is realistic to put these things in place. So it would be, though, as you can see, approximately about a 10-month process to actually get it in place. So I wanted to have some feedback from the council tonight, thoughts about moving forward with that sooner this year. I think there are some components of this that are really going to provide a significant better amount of services to our residents, to our businesses, and also just the software utilization for our department heads, for our human resources. There's really things here that I think can help our staff and really give our staff more time and ability to work on other things and other projects through a really useful software.
All right. Mr. Bowman, my question would be, as we bring it in-house, I'm just envisioning, and I'm probably wrong at this, I'm just envisioning 8,000 envelopes being stuffed and stamps put on them. And so I'm assuming that that's not how it is. Most of them now is maybe pay online and email, that sort of thing.
There would still obviously be a component there. We do have customers that the bills are still sent if that is the request to be able to pay those. We receive it in the U.S. mail. But we do have a large component of city residents and businesses that utilize the city's current online ability, whether it's automatic payment or if they go online and just want to do a credit card payment. Through this, obviously, for the city, there's a savings in entities using that, as you have the ability of any service these days to make those auto pays or to pay that online and go paperless. And that would be the same things that we'd really be pushing and offering continuously to try to, obviously, the less amount of paper and mailing that we have to send out, there's obviously a cost savings to the cities.
And how many hours do you think we have staff that's fixing the current issues that come in-house that we're dealing with?
We do have some more complex issues in our utility billing that we've kind of talked about when we created that position out there, that really dealt with some of the more complexities and accounts and meter issues and changes and some of the things that simply that Opus isn't capable of in regards without having feet on the ground and being able to interact with our public works employees. And then there are things that come up that are mistakes, and not to say that we're all human and not to say that a mistake couldn't be made by a city employee, but when we have an entity that's answering the phone, City of Wyoming, and there are mistakes made, and sometimes we don't always know about it or isn't communicated, then we have to go back and try to clean it up. At times that can be frustrating. So we really think there'd be value in having some ownership and bringing it in-house and having those billings and that piece of the city, obviously a long one, being correct and being done in a little more successful manner.
Okay, and I'll go around the room then. Member Luker, any questions?
Well, I'm noticing it on the acceptance page. There's a note that says, there's a 1 year, if you don't like what we're doing, you can get a return on the software and get a refund. And I'm just wondering kind of what the threshold is once we get, 6 months, 9 months into utilizing this. What is the threshold for errors before we determine that it's not something that we're liking?
That's a good question, Councilmember Luger. That's something that we've had when we had the actual demos here, and we went through that software. But I think it's more or less an item in there as far as that, if we are having frustrations or we don't feel it's appropriate. I really haven't dug into that component with the vendor. I certainly could to kind of give maybe you a better idea of what exactly that would detail to say, if we really aren't happy, if we don't feel it's a good fit for the city. I wouldn't anticipate that, but I think it would be good per your question to get that in a little more detail exactly how that would work. So we have a fallback if for some reason we were not happy with it. I can certainly ask some more questions on that and get back to yourself and the council.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Member Schilling?
I'm actually going to physically turn my mic on instead of holding it this time. There's just a couple of things I wanted to add, Rob. I know you've probably heard this probably on more than one occasion, but I've been through 2 of these, and I cannot stress the importance of staff putting together your workflows, your data going in and out of this thing. This is going to be a lot of work on staff's part, just to kind of pre-warn you right now. Yeah, they do a lot of work, but there's a lot of stuff that you guys will have to provide up front for them to create that transfer over. And if things on that transfer over aren't working typically, it's usually because it was input incorrectly. It's going to take you pretty much the 10 months and everything you had said. But and the way I've always understood software guarantees, to kind of touch on Claire's point, is usually it's from your go live date. That's your startup. That's when your process is actually functioning and working for the city, the way I've always understood it. So I don't know if they were a little clear on that or not. I just think this is something, in my opinion, that's long overdue for the city of Wyoming. Again, you're putting everything into one cup, which is nice because then you can have multiple users and multiple people and staff in your office can actually answer, multiple questions outside of what they're at normally taking care of. So that's pretty much all I had to add.
I can see that Kelly is looking really excited about jumping in and doing that project, right, Kelly? So, all right, I have one question before I get to Member Yeager. What type of technical support do they have?
I think that's one thing that really stood out in all the conversations that we've had with other municipalities on this, that they really touted during their presentation. And we've talked to a few different communities that have this, and also Ms. Lynch, our finance director, their experiences at other municipalities they use. And that is probably the biggest thing that we hear is that customer service and that maintenance, that it's really impressive. And they're able to, if it isn't a chat, you're able to have a phone call with someone. And that's one thing that really sets them apart from a lot of these other entities, is that they have such incredible maintenance and those helplines and help desk to help staff to clear up issues or problems, or whether it's, as we go through that training process and implementation. So that's something that we've really heard positive. And Ms. Lynch, I don't know if you can attest to that in your use at other municipalities, but it kind of was a resounding theme in all my conversations.
Yeah, I actually do use this software at one of my other cities. I think they do have excellent support. And like Rob said, whether that is them logging in with you to see what you're looking at, talking through something, I think that they offer really great training from the get-go, as well as it is a very user-friendly interface, and it's easy kind of to navigate and find what you need just with, by yourself too, before reaching out to tech support.
All right, great, thank you. Member Yeager, do you have questions?
Yeah, if we move this project up to start this year, then it becomes an unbudgeted item. Where's the money going to come from?
Correct, it would be unbudgeted. We would look at utilizing that capital revolving fund for this project. Like I said, it is currently in our CIP for 21, so we would essentially just be moving it ahead approximately if the council were to move forward with it or approve it, we'd be essentially moving it forward about 3.5-4 months. But we think that this would be an item that really would be a lot of value to the city, and the timing to get it in place. We think that's important to move on this sooner than later, as we continue to have issues with Banyan and Opus. And it's come to a point where I just think it's important to get this in front of the council now instead of waiting until 21.
And actually, just to kind of piggyback off of Rob. So in the long-term plan, if you looked at Fund 401, your capital equipment fund, there's 2 items for new software. So it's actually in the long-term plan for 2020. We've included the contract execution prices for both contracts in 2020, as well as what will need to be paid in 2021 to finalize. So if we're looking at the long-term plan, it currently is, budgeted for 2020 as well as 2021.
Well, then if there's sufficient funds available, start it.
I'm sorry, what was that?
If there are sufficient funds available, since this is unbudgeted, then start it.
Okay.
Well, okay. Rob, I do have one more question, and I don't know if you can quantify this or not. When you talk about all the issues and stuff, how much time would you say staff is of their time is trying to troubleshoot what's going on? And that may be hard to quantify, but
Sure.
just kind of curious as to what you're going through or what staff is.
It's dependent upon the day. I know that our accounting clerk, Ms. Sachs, she has multiple crashes a day on the fund accounting application that we currently use. And then there is the staff component of timing when we have utility billing issues that weren't done correctly, whether it's simple things like move in, move outs, reading errors, things like that. So, they compound pretty quickly in regards to both whether there's mistakes by Opus or whether that there's issues by Banyan. The time card module or in Banyan, we continue to have issues with that. crashing trying to get customer support from that. There's really one individual there that can handle any issues with that. And if they're not there, you're pretty much out of luck. So obviously when we do time cards, council employees, we do them on a Monday if they want to be paid. And if it doesn't move forward and work, it might not be the day that they anticipate. So that's important. So that there's just some quantifying hours on it. I don't know if I'd have the ability to do that, but we do see constant issues right now that I think really is a kind of a waste of staff's time.
Okay, thank you.
You're
So
welcome.
what I'm really going to do then, because I think, Mr. Linwood, what you want us to do is give you that direction so you can bring it to the next council meeting for a formal motion, correct?
That would be more that you'd be willing to staff to bring this to a future council meeting for review. I wanted to get consensus from the council before we just brought this for you. I wanted to have a conversation about it. So we would look to bring the proposal forward to the council at a future meeting. And then also that agreement with AAM to help do that implementation.
Okay, and do you want each one of us to answer yes or no, or do you feel like you have that direction based on?
I think I have consensus on that, but if anyone doesn't feel that way, please say so. But I feel that right now that we have consensus, but if I'm misinterpreting that, please say so.
Rob, can I ask a quick question?
Of course.
Did you guys account for the additional training for the building department report designer? That's a report writing program that I feel is very important, and it'll definitely make Fred's job a lot easier. It's a pretty easy, user-friendly thing, but then it makes anything for him to search for county reports, state reports, SAC, all those things that we report here in Wyoming. I think it makes it a lot easier for him and turns into a couple of clicks versus searching and taking things like that. So.
I think when we went through, and Fred, please interject if I'm wrong, I believe that we did have conversations with the software provider about that application, because obviously Fred right now has to do those essentially off his Access database, those reports to the state. Fred, I believe we went through that. Can you, am I remembering correctly?
We did. It's been a few months now, but we did go through that, and those were some of the questions I had for them also. And it for my department, I think it's going to work very well.
All right, so I think we have our answer then, correct?
I think so, yes.
Move forward. Okay. And this isn't the final estimate though. I mean, you're gonna go through and then when you present it to council, will that, or is this the final?
This is the most updated proposal we have, but I think there's still a few things that I want to go through on that proposal along with AAM, because I think there's maybe a few questions I have on some costs, and obviously we're always trying to get the best deal for the city. So I'd like to review it a little closer and have some conversations.
Okay, sounds great. So we then would be on agenda item 6, the East Viking Project 2021. Is that Mr. Erickson?
Rob, I think you were going to lead that off, right?
I can certainly start it, but yeah, I think Mark and I will both, Mr. Erickson and I will both be talking about it, and we can, Mark, I don't know if you want to share maybe a GIS map of the area. In the memo to council, I showed kind of the area we were discussing. As council is aware, next year in 2021, we'll be doing a significant sewer upsizing between Fallbrook and Fenwick Avenue on East Viking Boulevard that will require us to essentially open up the street and do pretty much a complete reconstruction to that area. The part that's west on East Viking, or on Viking Boulevard is not the city's. And then 61, we're working in collaboration with MnDOT, is they have a project coming in directly after the city does their project. The component that the staff wanted some direction on is the piece of East Viking that heads east, that would be essentially from 61, that would go by the Cornerstone, the former chiropractor office, and then on the other side, the chiropractor, and then the First State Bank of Wyoming. Through this process is engineering, and we have looked at this. We could make, I guess, argument either way that those parcels that are going to receive essentially that newly reconstructed street would be could be considered that they should have to pay an assessment on that project. And currently the city's assessment policy is at 80/20. There are some interesting components to this, and that we'll bring up. And I think Mr. Erickson's bringing up. I think that's our 2015 street project, I believe.
Yes, that's correct.
And you can see, council, on our 2015 street project, you can see that many of these businesses were assessed on that because many of these businesses have up to 2 or 3 accesses. So there really isn't any component in our assessment policy that deals with this in regards to when you have those different accesses in different streets. We wanted, I guess, some feedback from council on this in regards to some of those properties along the way. If that's something that as Mr. Erickson begins to do the feasibility study for that project and probably get it to the city council late this year or early next year, how they would feel, or something that they want to look at in regards to potential assessments for some of these businesses on this corridor.
Yeah, and so I guess the question is, and Rob did a really nice job of laying out the MnDOT project and what this project consists of. And it really, the segment that we're talking about this evening is this segment here from County Road 30 or Trunk Highway 61 east to Fenwick, where we do connect into that existing sanitary sewer. So this stretch right here, we know that the roadway is in poor condition. We do, going through right down the center with sanitary sewer is going to severely impact that roadway to a point where there's not going to be a lot left of that roadway. And so we're looking at reconstructing those first 2 blocks just because the roadway condition warrants it, and it will be destroyed with the sanitary sewer project. We've looked at a couple of different trenchless ideas to construct that sanitary sewer, and it just is cost prohibitive considering the condition of the existing roadway. And so what we wanted to discuss is, does it make sense? We're nearing 90% completion of the plans. We're still working with MnDOT on the public outreach portion of the project, and going to be working with a lot of the businesses in the community. It's going to be impactful as the access west to the freeway will be limited for a period of time during construction, and traffic control. In fact, as we cross the intersection here, Highway 61, in fact, will be closed as well. And so it's going to be impactful. And so there's a lot of community outreach. But the question that we have here is, do we need to move forward the public improvement process where we would need to move forward the feasibility study and walk through the public hearing process and all of that? And that would be required if we're going to be assessing adjacent property owners. And so I think that is the primary question that we have, is how do we want to move forward? Do we want to move forward the public improvement project and assess adjacent landowners? You can see the properties here in blue currently previously have been assessed as part of our 2015 improvement project, because as Mr. Linwood indicated, there's accesses at more than one location. The cornerstone here off of Felton, the bank, of course, off of Felton as well. And so a lot of including the bank parking lot, I think there's some multifamily here. There's a few here that have not, but I think one of them in particular does not have a driveway access onto the roadway. And so it's really comes in from the rear of the parking with the access coming off of Highway 61. And so there's really 1 or 2 here. We certainly would not be able to assess, if we're bonding for any improvements, which I don't think we are. I can't recall, maybe Hannah can comment. I don't believe we are, but, we would have, the 20% assessed would certainly be not reasonable or feasible there as well. And, further looking at going down through that process, the amount that we receive in assessments might not exceed the additional costs of going through that process as well. And so we wanted to just understand that we would need to start that public improvement process relatively soon so we could bid the project here early part of 2021 for construction starting in this, I guess, early as April of 2021.
Mr. Erickson, can you help me understand why we don't have to upgrade the rest of the roads after that all the way down to Polaris?
Well, I'm not saying that we don't, that roadway is not in great condition. Right now, that is an MSA route. We are going to at least our planning would be that we would look at, well, one, I think this was one of our top priorities, being that we're already here reconstructing these first 2 blocks. I think the condition of the roadway in various areas does warrant constructing that. We have a lot of priorities in various neighborhoods, others as well that we're all aware of. Our MSA account balance is currently in the negative, and it will be in the negative until 2023 when we start to build that balance back up. And so right now, if we intend to utilize state aid funds for the project and we're not able to advance encumber any funds right now, their account balance at MnDOT for MSA cities is in code red, which means they're not allowing any advance encumbrances of those funds. And so from staff's perspective, without wanting to bond for improvements, we're potentially looking at holding off on East Viking, the next portion of it, until such time that we're able to either have a balance or at least advance encumber some of those funds.
Okay, thank you. So I'll go around the room, questions from rest of council. Member Luker?
I have no questions.
All right, and Member Schilling?
I actually have no questions. This is one that's coming up that I kind of dread, but it needs to be done, so.
All right, and Member Yeager?
So it looks like the majority of the businesses along that stretch have already been assessed, correct?
Yes, correct.
And we say in our policy that you only get assessed once every 20 years.
There is language for that street. I don't know if it says, I don't have it right in front of me, Councilmember Yeager, but I believe it's pertinent to the street project, but I'd want to look at it. But these properties are unique when we had identified that they do have multiple accesses and they have recently been assessed.
Right, so they have not been assessed for East Viking, but they have
Been assessed for the
driveways. And since they have multiple driveways, that's the uniqueness of this project. And so that's ultimately what our request is, just to have some consensus from council as to whether or not this is a public improvement project that includes assessments to adjacent property owners, as they've not been assessed for East Viking. But again, it is a short stretch. The majority of them have been assessed already for the other properties, for the other project, I should say.
Okay, but normally when we have a corner lot with, on 2 streets, we do it just where the one driveway is. Like on lot 188, is there a driveway going out to Viking?
I don't believe there is. I believe 184 does not either. No,
Right.
179 and 180, I believe, have accesses both on Felton and East Viking.
Okay, the bank 166. Oh, there is that little to go in on on Viking.
Correct.
So you would only be assessing 1, 2, 3 properties?
I believe it would be 3 or 4, correct?
That weren't assessed on the prior projects, right?
No, I mean, there are like maybe 3 or 4 properties that have an access to East Viking.
Correct.
I mean, 188, 184 do not. The bank does have one. 178. I mean, I don't think 179 has a onto East Viking unless they're sharing it with 180.
Mark, maybe I can bring up a GIS just so we can look at
Oh,
those closer.
I'll stop sharing.
Oh, nice picture.
And it's just loading up here. Okay, and I will share my screen. Okay, can everyone see that?
Not yet.
There we go.
So I think you're looking at the lots along this, and as Mr. Erickson stated, the property here, they gain access right off of Highway 61 or County Road 30. And then the building here does have access to us at East Viking, and then this parcel is separate from the parking lot here, but there is access to this area. I don't think, Mark, when you had that up, I don't believe either one of these were assessed in the 15, the two here.
That's correct. They were not.
So probably those three are the only ones that you could maybe make a case that that's where they provide access. But once again, you have over here off of Finley, correct?
Yeah.
So
And then on the north side of the street, you have where the Cornerstone is, but does well, now it's that Grange daycare. Is there access technically onto the side street?
there is, and they received assessments based on that 15 project, even though you can make a case that there's access to both off of County Road 30 and off of East Viking, but they did, for the reconstruction of this street, they did receive assessments in 2015.
Right, and the property line is not on, they don't have a driveway access on their property. It appears on off of East Viking, correct?
You're actually correct, Mark. Yeah, if we highlight that.
I don't know. Is the amount of assessments going to be worth the cost of assessing? Because I mean, I could also see someplace like the Cornerstone, they might get a little upset with 2 assessments.
Right there, the one thing I will comment, with this road project, those sidewalks as well, MnDOT will be coming through and they're going to be making those pedestrian ramps ADA accessible. And when we go through and reconstruct this roadway, the curb will come out, and that likely is going to necessitate the replacement of the concrete walks through there as well. And so it is going to be a pretty significant 2-block stretch there. At least that first block with the sidewalk there. And in fact, the second block there as well on the south side will likely require the removal and replacement of the sidewalk as well.
Now, once upon a time, there were trees along that section. Any thought of putting them back?
Well, it's an awfully narrow corridor. You can see, I don't know the distance, but it's concrete walk right from the back of curb to the property line on both sides. And so, it's certainly difficult to put in trees in that area.
Okay.
And still maintain, the width that you'd like to have for pedestrians to maneuver.
I thought I had remembered some.
You may be right. I just don't recall that, and I know it might be a challenge to keep them alive in that location.
Yeah, that was the problem.
All right. Did I ask everybody if they had questions?
Yeah.
All right. I think we got everybody. All right. So Mr. Linwood, Mr. Erickson, what you're looking from council is direction on whether we feel that the 3 quote unquote properties should be assessed, correct? Based on the information you've given us?
Correct.
Correct.
Okay. So I'm going to go around the room. If you guys could let me know your thoughts on that. Is it worth it or not for those assessments? I'm going to start with Member Luker.
I think I would be more comfortable proceeding with the assessments if we checked the city policy on that time frame. I do think it's a project that, it has to get done. And so I guess I would potentially be in favor of it.
Okay, so you're a maybe?
Yes.
Okay, sounds good. All right, Member Schilling?
Again, I have to actually back Claire on that one. I would like to look into policy, but I am in favor of it if the policy allows it.
All right, and Member Yeager?
Difficult because I can see some upset people with that since they've been assessed already. I mean, how do you justify the second assessment? And and maybe there's something in a policy that does, but I haven't seen it yet.
All right, and my thought is this, it is going to be possibly a hardship for those businesses if they have already been assessed and there'll be another assessment. It would be a hardship most likely. Housing wise, I don't think we have a house that is would be assessed again. It's mostly the businesses, correct?
Correct.
So, and that's not, you know, a lot of the times when we do assessments and you know, it's shared by a lot of people. And this would be shared by 3. It could create a hardship. You know, so it's also in a spot that's our city, which everybody drives on. So I guess it's not a maybe for me. It's probably a hard no on just assessing those few properties on that when they have paid. So so we really are kind of at a tie onto that. So I don't know how to proceed with it.
You know, I know we're short of council members tonight. I mean, we could reevaluate the assessment policy per Councilmember Lugar and Schilling to see it, you know, if there was any consideration or any kind of language in there. I don't think there is, but we could certainly do that and bring it back to the council fairly shortly. Mr. Erickson, I don't know on your timeline. I know you said you're about 90% complete. How soon would you need some sort of definitive?
You know, I think we certainly could review and look at this and even bring it back to one of the next city council meetings for discussion if the council is inclined to do that at a city council meeting. I think time wise, I think we're okay. We would need, boy, at least a couple months lead time to. I mean, the feasibility study is one thing. We have the design complete, right? So I think we're, you know, it's more of a formal, formalizing it in and calling it a feasibility study. We would have to deviate from our policy. I have no confidence that we would be able to meet that benefit test in the assessment amount. When we look at assessing 20% of the improvements, I really don't believe that we would be able to assess these properties and still meet that benefit test that we can't assess more than the benefit received. And so I think that might be challenging to meet that requirement based on the cost of these 2 blocks of improvements.
Hey, real quick, Mark, you actually just answered my question. That was going to be my question. Benefit to cost, if that was going to be what's going to end up happening. So,
you know, if we're not bonding for these improvements, we can deviate from that. That 20% is related to bonding, and so that, you know, we can. I know our policy is that, but I think the benefit test might prevent us from assessing 20% if we were to move forward with assessing just 2 or 3 properties.
Out of curiosity, if we were to assess, would that be an eligible COVID grant, CARES grant for those businesses? Little off the wall, but
I don't think based on my knowledge of the policy, it is. I mean, it's a good question. There's a lot of different creative ways that some of that CARES money is being used. I don't think this would be an eligible expense, and it wouldn't be in time to utilize those dollars either, because there is that shorter window there, but it's a good question.
Yeah, it might be hard to show that nexus between the project and the COVID relief.
COVID. Yeah. Okay. So Claire, I think it's going to come down to you. Are you, does that change your mind at all, or would you still like to see what that policy is?
I'd just like to do the due diligence and see what the project is. Again, you know, I don't want hardships for businesses. It's a tough call.
It is. Okay, Mr. Linwood, do you think it's something that you could bring forth to council at the next meeting?
We certainly can. Yeah, I think we've gotten feedback tonight where we can kind of research the areas that were in question, and as Mr. Erickson brought up, you know, I think we're down to those 3 parcels, and then that look at that benefit if that's going to be realistic on it. So yeah, I think it was a good conversation starter, and we can complete it at our next meeting.
All right, sounds good. Thank you. We are on number 7. We have 2 more to go. We've been at this for 2 hours. Time flies. So we are on number 7, racial equity. And I'm not sure, is Ms. Dumas taking this one?
Yes, I am, Mayor. Thank you. Mayor, members of council, we wanted to continue a conversation that was discussed at a previous council work session on equity and inclusion. There's been a lot of conversation locally and nationally on this topic since our work session, and a lot of conversation among trainers, organizations like the League on how to provide services that are useful to cities, especially in these times of COVID. How can we generate community conversations on equity and inclusion? One of the things that staff's put together is a draft survey, which is included in your packet, that outlines some questions that allow us to get a sense of what are the topics relative to our specific community on equity and inclusion that we really want to do some more deep digging into, provide some additional resources or do some additional trainings as was discussed at the last work session. This can really help us to focus where we want to do those specific efforts. We wanted to present the draft to the City Council for review. If you have any comments, our proposal is to distribute this as we have with previous Polco surveys. So that would be through the city's social media platforms, as well as our website and emailing through our newsletters. And that will allow us to get whoever is interested in responding, we will take those responses in and present them back in a report to the City Council.
All right, so we're going to open it up to questions. I'm just going to say I don't have any questions. So we'll go to Member Yeager.
I wonder if maybe we should include something about welcoming towards people from different regions of the country. Because while it is not illegal, it is certainly there.
Absolutely. Yeah, I can add a question relating to regional, welcoming regional people. Mm-hmm.
All right, Member Schilling.
Oh,
you're muted.
It's so goofy sometimes. I actually didn't have any questions. I actually had a little bit of a chuckle at Linda's comment, but I think that is pretty interesting. But I think it's a pretty well put together survey. I think Kelly did a great job on it. Yeah, we'll go from there. I think this will give us some good feedback. So yeah, that's
all
it.
Right. Okay, and then let's go Member Luker.
Oh, okay. So I have just a couple of questions. I like the questions. I'm wondering if we can include anything in terms of disability. We talked about inclusion, especially, you know, when we're looking at you know, ADA compliance in parks and city buildings. I think that would be something that important to include if possible. And then my other questions are when are we looking to push this out, and how long does it stay open so that we can disseminate the results?
Yeah, we could send this out if the council's interested rather immediately. So we usually try and have these posted and available for responses somewhere between 2 and 3 weeks. That allows us some time to kind of send some reminders, which is usually when people notice it and take the survey, and allows us to get a pretty decent number of responses. So that's where I would say 2 to 3 weeks for the survey to be live, and then we would bring the report back to City Council immediately following that.
Okay, and then final question is just what are you guys finding in terms of trainings, programs? I can only imagine that there are, you know, Garrett could be backed up in terms of what they're offering. And I'm wondering if there's like a timeline of when we might be able to utilize some of those resources.
Yeah, I know that, so previously GARE was not planning on doing a cohort. My understanding is now that they are, and they're in the planning phases of putting together what that's going to look like. I'm waiting anxiously to get an update from the league as to when that is going to be open for us. I know that they're actively working on it, but I don't have a specific date at this point.
Awesome, thank you.
Mhm.
All right. I believe that was everybody. So the consensus on Ms. Dumas was to go right ahead, add a few extra questions in there, and let's get it out to our residents.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. And we are on number 8, the very last one, code enforcement. I believe this is something that member Schilling has brought up a couple times. And Mr. Weck, are you going to be presenting on this, or Mr. Linwood?
I think I might start it off.
No, I'm not. Okay.
I think I'll start out, but I think we're going to have input probably from Councilmember Schilling and Mr. Weck and Chief Hoppy on this topic. It was brought to the City Council. Mr. Schilling brought it up at the beginning of this year, talking about trying to act with a little different code that maybe gave the City of Wyoming an ability to work on some of the properties that are more blight and a nuisance, and have that junk and whether it's a grass or whatever it may be. And I gave the council a little bit of background on the process, and Chief Hoppy or Mr. Weck, I don't know if you kind of want to go through, there's different components of it, how when Mr. Weck gets a complaint, how he handles it, and it's more of a reactive. And then Mr. Hoppy or Chief Hoppy has a more proactive approach that he does every spring with his department, and how that works.
I can probably lead off with this one. It certainly isn't segmented by any means. It's, myself, our department, the police department, and building safety really work hand in hand on these code enforcements. Rarely do we take one that he's not involved in, and rarely does he have one that we don't have to get involved in. Usually if the building department starts it, they send us the report so we're aware of it and can help track it. And then when we don't get compliance with his notices and warning letters, that certainly comes to the police department for an enforcement effort. I think most of our council is pretty aware of our community's flavor and palate for disorderly properties. Junk vehicles, junk in the yard. I think you guys get probably as many, if not more, complaints than what I see every spring, and they don't ever seem to go away. They always seems to be that 60 or 70% of the properties that we deal with seem to recycle every year and become habitual problems with no resolve. And it's frustrating on our staff because we really don't have the teeth in our ordinances to certainly hold people accountable to it. So under our current process, we've been successful on large projects. I think you guys know one on the near 35 Rosetta Kellett Boulevard that we spent $50,000, $60,000 on as a community cleanup, and we're able to assess it back and recover it. But I'm going to say that's an anomaly. It's not the normal. Mostly what we deal with are multiple junk vehicles, just properties that haven't been cleaned up and grass hasn't been cut. Most 90% of what we deal with are properties that the homeowner can solve with very little effort or financial impact to them. And it really becomes, a willingness to comply and a resistance. And so with our current process, we spend an enormous amount of staff time, honestly, on some of these properties where we'll send officers out, or the building department will go out on a complaint. We even do it proactively every spring to try and get ahead of it. We inspect the properties as much as we can. We identify what the issues are. We contact the owners and try to make person-to-person contact with them, at least on the initial. We follow up with letters on what needs to be accomplished. We give them time frames to accomplish things. We do follow-up every 30 days on those properties. If we see progression, then we give them an extended period of time for compliance. It's usually not until we see a lack of compliance or they stall out in solving issues before we issue a citation. Once that citation is issued, we're pretty much done. I mean, it's tough for us to go beyond that citation piece of it. And so when we issue the $75 citation, the individual has to go to court. And what we're seeing is the courts often will throw the citations out. They'll disposition them out with a promise from the property owner to clean them up, which usually resolves in essentially no compliance and starting the process over the next calendar year, which then continue to agitate those neighbors because they're not seeing any resolve by the city to solve these issues. Occasionally we'll get the large ones where we have to get the civil injunction process involved, and will take us about at least 12 to 18 months once we start that process before we get to a point where we can go in and physically clean the property up. And then we have to assess back to the property owners the cost of that. So by the time we go through a 12-month period with them of trying to entice them, and sometimes 24 months, and then another 18 months to get the civil process done, to get an injunction to seize their properties, basically seize and destroy their junk property. We've already had a lot of distaste by the community because of the length of the process, to be frank. So we're looking, from an enforcement piece of it, we're certainly looking for a mechanism within the ordinance that allows us to hold people accountable. And I think what it comes, and we've looked at and talked with Member Schilling on a couple of other departments on how they do this in communities. And a progressive fine amount, I think, is a very motivating factor. And the reason I say that is because if a homeowner knows it's going to cost him $75 in a fine, but doesn't have to pay to have his junk moved or a tow truck to come in and tow his car out for $150, from a financial mechanism, it's sometimes cheaper just to roll the dice and take the $75 fine or no fine at all, rather than having to pay a fine. And so if we can put a mechanism in place that really makes this, that pulls that administrative fine process back into the city and makes it progressive, meaning we'll still do our normal warnings on the properties as we proceed. And at some point, when that doesn't work, then we begin the fine process. And on the first one, it's relatively low, but it progressively gets more and more expensive as we issue those citations to a point where it becomes financially motivating to the property owner to solve the problem, because the expense is going to be much greater than the cost to clean. And with that ability, we can assess back to the property taxes so that we can collect on those receipts. Literally giving us some teeth to enforce the nuisance ordinances, because right now the only way that we can accomplish them, there's only two ways we really accomplish any success in trying to enforce nuisance abatement. First is through compliance, self-compliance, that the property owner just simply wasn't aware, and somebody within that house, at least one person hopefully, has the motivation to say they don't want to visit again by the city or the police department. Or secondly, that we go through the long drawn out process of a civil process to get the injunctions in place to do the forced cleanup. And even those aren't successful. We've seen it succeed in a couple properties that we've done in Wyoming. But we've also seen it fail on one significant parcel on the west side of 35, where the courts simply don't want to impose that injunction on the individual. So therefore, we become essentially powerless in our ability to clean that property up at all. And it continues to get perpetually worse as time goes on. So I certainly like the enforcement piece, I think, that we talked about. I know it's going to take some courage to do it, but I think we still gain compliance from those who are self-compliant, and we continue that process. But for those who aren't and are habitual offenders, I think we definitely have to put a mechanism in place that's a little more aggressive to really financially motivate them to clean these properties up. Because the council, as ourselves, and I honestly think you guys probably get more complaints than we do on a regular basis that nothing's being done. And the reality is we've exhausted everything we can.
All right, Fred, do you want to add anything, or Dennis?
I would actually like to add, I'm going to piggyback off of Chief. I have been working with this type of program in 2 different cities currently. And one of the things that people seem to forget that when it's presented to them, they look at it as it's a punitive or a financial, I'm going to go get you because your grass isn't mowed or the stuff in your yard isn't cleaned up. And if you have a progressive system on that citation program, when it gets up there, it does get their attention. And a lot of people forget that when you have a $2,000 fine sitting in your mailbox because you didn't cut your yard, that gets your attention quite quickly. And then all of a sudden they get very angry and they call the city and go, what the heck is this? I didn't see this. I didn't see that. That also gives us the ability to go, okay, well, look, I can waive 75% of this, 80% of this, as per how we adopt it, if you take care of it. Most of the lawn or weed or anything like that is usually something that the city can abate. We can send our public works guys over there, and not to add anything to anybody, but you can send a public works guy over there, mow his yard, and you assess them $150. Then they don't have to pay nothing, but the yard got mowed. But that turns into, hey, look, I don't have to pay anything and they mow my yard for me. So most of the time with the progressive citing, as that thing gets into a second and a third, one of the ways I've done it both places is it starts off as a $200 fine. If they don't comply within 10 days, it turns into a 400. 10 days, it turns into an 800, and so on and so forth. And at some point, they have to reach out to us. And if they don't reach out to us, yes, this will continue to build. And I've seen fines as high as $57,000. And then he finally made a phone call. I went before council, council beat him up pretty good, which was, interesting. But I just think it's an easier way for the city staff to enforce these type of public nuisances that go unchecked, as Chief said, for months and years at a time, because we just don't have any ability to do anything because we don't have any code language to enforce. So I don't know how many of you have actually read through this, but one of the major parts is Fred did, I believe, put in the IPMC. That actually gives you a lot of teeth when it comes to your exterior and even your interior based on complaints of anything that comes through. I did send Rob over the sample here that I have him attached to this, but there's a lot of things we can adjust. And the goal of this is not to punish, it's to get compliance. Because if I have, and I hate using myself, but I'm gonna do it, but if I have a $350,000 house and my neighbor's house looks like Sanford & Son, my value drops. And if we can't get him to clean it up even between us, a lot of people don't like to talk to each other, which seems pretty weird to me, but some things turn confrontational, and then Chief gets a call on that end of it too. And this takes that out of there as well. You can set up an anonymous link on our website to complain on a site. You don't have to have a name and address. Somebody can literally log in and notify the city of this address and the problem, and somebody can drive by. It doesn't matter who does the enforcement. It is a shared duty between a lot of the places that I know currently use this process, as well as us. I mean, there's 6 of us that all have different positions, but us as a staff, we share these duties. If we see it, we handle it or pass it to the appropriate people. So I just think this is something that keeps your city, it keeps your city looking good. It keeps things up to a certain standard in my mind, because as Chief did say, a lot of these things are just laziness. And I don't like that, because it's not fair to your surrounding neighbors. If you don't feel like picking up garbage, that's not a good thing. So,
and I think it's important to highlight Member Schilling's comments that our goal isn't revenue raising here by any means. We would prefer not to issue anybody a citation, to be honest with you. We would prefer that they just, clean their properties up for their neighbors and for our community. But I think we are all aware of a 259th Street complaint that we have right now on a business that's being run out of the house, and we've exhausted those efforts with no result. By simply writing a citation and sending it to a judge, we lose control of the disposition. Where if we have a progressive internal process, and as those fines escalate up, and now we have the homeowner or property owner reaching out to us in whatever state they choose to at whatever point in the process, we would have an administrative process to grieve those fines. And in that process, you know, if they can show or prove compliance, it certainly gives the city the latitude to deviate. Where we just don't have that control once we send it to the court systems, because the court systems truly do not want to deal with this issue. They have more pressing, higher level issues that they're dealing with, and to them, this is purely just a nuisance as much as it is to the neighbor that has to view it.
Okay. And so just to be clear, what we're talking about is this would be a position that would be created in the 2021 budget?
I don't think we're talking about a position at this time. I think it's going through the process of getting this in place and, you know, potentially have existing staff administer it. You know, we've talked about, I know when we originally talked about this, we talked about potentially whether it was building or some sort of community service. I know that WSB as a consultant, they provide a service to some of their municipalities too for this. But I think right now, we're just trying to talk the general, you know, putting the ordinance in, and as both Mr. Weck, Mr. Hoppy, and Councilmember Schilling talked about, giving the city to have some ability to try to control these properties and not tell council members or residents that we've done everything we can. We're really sorry, but that's it, which I think is
okay.
I definitely don't want to get the horse in front of the cart on this one. And I think by putting a mechanism in place and testing the mechanism first, because as our community grows, we had this conversation with our attorney yesterday, and he can certainly validate it because he works in cities of much different sizes and variety. As our city continues to grow, we're going to see more and more of these issues and less tolerance of properties like this. And if we put the mechanism in place now, we get an early intervention on this and hopefully kind of reduce some of that. But as our community grows and we see more and more complaints come in, because that is organic as a growing community happens, then maybe later down the road, you look at, you know, are we pulling enough fines in because we're not getting compliance to use a CSO or a code enforcement person? But we're certainly not there in 21, and nor would I suggest it in 22. I think it's important that we develop a mechanism in 21 and implement it, and then test it, you know, for a year or 2 years or 3 years, however long. And then as the community organically grows and these issues, you know, become more and more relevant, that we have the mechanism in place, and then you can, I probably won't be around, but you can talk about staffing then.
Okay, well, that was my question, because I am aware of several of the issues, but I don't see it as a full-time position or that sort of thing. So I wanted to clear that up. My other thing is, I strongly believe that I don't think the police officers this should be something that they're involved in right now. There's other ways such as this, I think, would be far better than to have our police stopping over and dealing with it. So that's my 2 cents on that. We'll go to Member Lugar.
I think we definitely have to start with the language and identifying which mechanisms we have, so that, because it, you know, I mean, it's everybody's community, right? What I would like to see is, as we are looking at language to adopt, looking at how we want to frame it and identifying those mechanisms, I really, you know, and as Chief Hoppy alluded to, you know, if the majority of these are situations where, you know, residents have the ability and have the means to deal with things that are causing neighbors to complain, there are probably folks who don't. And I think that we have to you know, while we want a beautiful community, but I also want to show empathy and figure out how we can work with residents who might need that help, who aren't just trying to avoid dealing with the problem. Does that make sense?
No, it does. And I'm going to say that, you know, ourself and Fred have been really good about working with those members and trying to find solutions for them, letting them know when we have community cleanup days, you know, different outlets for them to get rid of stuff. And we run into very, very few of those. What we run into purely is more just resistance and failure to comply, period, not necessarily a lack of resources. Because I think if we do run into someone with a lack of resources, I think, you know, I've seen some groups actually step up and help people do their yards because of it, you know, whether they're disabled or don't have the financial capabilities. I've seen groups actually step up and say, we want to help. And I think it's important that we continue to find those partnerships when possible, but and be open and flexible to it. I think it lends back to what our initial goal is. It isn't to be punitive, it's to be productive. And I think, you know, that's really the spirit of what we're trying to accomplish here. And it always has been, it will continue in the future, but we need the mechanism to deal with those other 20%ers who have the resources, just don't have the motivation.
Fair enough.
If I could add, we'll get some of those trash houses. We'll contact Chisago County Adult Services to get some help that way. When I get phone calls from people about, you know, the grass is too long, I'll talk to them. Well, do you know why it's too long? Is there a reason why the person, can you help them out? Sometimes that helps. So we do try to look at those alternatives, but I can write a letter and I'll get the next complaint and I just have to change the date. I don't have to change anything else. And I just keep sending these letters and they just, you know, I don't know what they do with them, but they're obviously not taking care of the problem. And it becomes frustrating for us when you're just spinning your wheels, and to have a process where we can actually, you know, make a change is what we need.
All right, thank you. Member Yeager?
Okay. Chief Hoppy, I'm looking at your June 20th, not June 20th, June 12th, 2020 police report. You list the numbers of junk vehicles and nuisance properties that you had to visit. So
Yep.
It seems that, I mean, we have 38, 18, 36, 14. It seems like a very few, we don't have a lot of these going on. Is that?
I can tell you we can certainly do more. And I think that lends into maybe Mayor Iverson's questions, staffing. Do we have, you know, down the road, if it's a, you know, seasonal CSO or a seasonal code enforcement person, you know, you could certainly keep that person busy for sure. These are the ones that we most often get complaints on. There are some proactive ones in there that if we see an issue from the street, then we address it. But most of those, I would say, are complaint driven.
Okay. Just listening to the conversation, I mean, the reaction I have is I would be concerned about it being very heavy-handed. And I don't know if heavy-handed, it just, something about it just bothers me.
Yeah, and to speak upon that, and you know, I don't think I would want to necessarily change the initial upfront process where we do the inspection, we reach out to them, we write the letter, we tell them what needs to be fixed, we give them a time frame to fix it, 30 days. We do the secondary follow-up inspection, and then we give them an extension. And at that 60-day mark, absolutely, it's heavy-handed, but intentfully so, because we're not seeing progress. If somebody makes progress in those 30 days, we're going to continue to extend them as long as progress is being made. But once it stops and stalls, that's where the punitive piece comes in as a motivating factor to get them to finish it. So it may appear to be heavy-handed, but by design, if we do invoke that component of it, it's so far down in the process that we've exhausted all our other avenues. It's intended to be motivative.
See, some of it struck me as the heavy-handedness was becoming earlier in the process?
Certainly not. I don't, that's not our intent. It's really to go after the habitual offenders that are repeated, year after year after year, and to go after the individuals that you get the complaints on year after year after year, or 3 or 4 months after we make that initial complaint and the council's following up with me relative to what has been done about it. Right now, when I get those complaints from you guys and you get them from the residents, once we hit that exhausted, issue a citation, there's nothing else we can do. We've
Right.
exhausted it and we don't have a resolution. It should be nice to have some other mechanism in place to motivate them.
Chief, I have a quick question. If I can jump in here, I got a quick question because it kind of relates to what she's talking about. We're currently under a criminal process, correct?
Correct.
Taking it administratively, it turns it into a civil process between us and the city, and then we literally have the ability to waive everything, nothing, all of that. Again, this is about gaining compliance. Heavy-handed to me is a criminal process, because now it ends up in some type of record at the county level, the state level. This
Well,
is something that, go ahead.
Yeah, it gives us control all the way through the process.
Yes.
From the start through disposition.
Yep.
Where once we issue the citation, we no longer control disposition. And disposition has not been working in our favor to achieve compliance.
Correct. Okay.
How do we adapt for the more rural parts of the city? I mean, I've had a lot of people say, why are you coming after me? I moved out into the boondocks because so I can have my stuff all over and not bother anybody.
We do the code enforcement piece of it. And so I'm gonna volley this over to Fred because he does kind of the zoning drafting component of it and works with the planning commission, and maybe he can talk about flexibility based on parcel size.
I think part of it, I agree. A person's home is their castle and they should be able to live there how they want. But they also have to be cognizant of their neighbors and their rights also. So in dealing with those larger parcels, some of it could just be as simple as put the stuff in the garage. Trying to find those things that can make it simple to do. But some of those other ones out they've got a vehicle that's spilling oil because it's damaged. Those are affecting the environment and affecting their neighbors too. So although I agree, it's my property, I should be able to do what I want to do with it. It's when you start affecting the neighbors also and their property values or their health where we need to do something about it. And I try to work with everyone and not get to that citation phase because like we said, once the citation's issued, we've lost control.
And I think, certainly there's different property classifications, industrial, commercial, residential, agricultural. And I think, some of that can be defined in code language based on the property classification and what those expectations are.
Okay.
I certainly wouldn't expect somebody that lives on an agricultural farm to have to put all his farming implements in a building by any means. And because they're not a licensed trailer, but that's very different than a residential property where you may have, several RVs out there that are unlicensed and roofs caving in and, everything else. So property classification, is always taken into consideration.
Okay, mostly so that there's some sensitivity shown towards the unique problems of the rural people too.
Right. Yep. Can I jump in one here? Linda, one of the things that is really common with what you're asking about right now, I hate using this term, but out of sight, out of mind. Most people that have acreage that still live within an incorporated city, they don't put it up on the front by the street. They're not parking junk cars up there, not piling garbage there. It's not being seen by the neighbors. Basically, you create the nuisance by putting it in front of everybody. And I know this is not a really nice thing to say, but people live in an incorporated city. You live in an incorporated city. You're not living in the rural Minnesota where there are no rules. Mm-hmm. There's a reason, we incorporate cities so we can have things that actually follow the rules. The rules are there, so everyone is treated the same. Your properties are relatively treated the same. You know, it's just respect for your surrounding people, you know, and as you get more rural, like Chief said, you can define, you know, if it's over an acre, they can park a camper on their backyard or up on the side of their house. You know, those type of things can be defined in this. It's not just hammer down and go, because you guys are all giving the examples of how this has to be tailored and worked through with all of us. Because all of us collectively get together and say, oh, I see the problem with this right here. So we adjust that language, we amend it. So.
And our job is to be, reasonable stewards out there. And I don't think that we would necessarily try to enforce a property that you collectively wouldn't agree needs to be enforced. That's kind of what the first step of that complaint process, whether we take it or Fred takes it, is to go out there and look at it with reasonable objectiveness on whether it's a violation and a nuisance or not. And not all complaints rise to that level currently, and nor would I expect that to change. The officers do try to use reasonable objectiveness to say, yeah, that's reasonably a nuisance, or no, it's reasonably not.
So if I were to kind of put this all together, what I believe I'm hearing is this, that for the most part, we're all very interested in how this code enforcement policy or ordinance would work, correct? And just kind of shake your head. That's kind of what I'm getting a feel for, right? Okay, I'm going to kind of wrap it up. So that we are in agreement that it's something we want to look at, that for the most part, it's probably something that is needed, but we need to see the overall steps on how it goes. So more of an outline. So it starts here and then to the next process, right? Correct? Because I think that would make us all more at ease for those of us that are questioning a little bit more about empathy and how that works. And if somebody has mental illness or a hoarding problem or whatever, that we're sympathetic to that, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So Claire, is that kind of going in the right direction?
Absolutely.
Okay. Linda, I can't see you, but is that a yes?
That's a yes.
Okay. All right. And Linda, is that a yes for you?
Oh, wait. Oh, I am on. Yeah, somewhat. My concerns is I don't want us to be a police. Well, that's not a good word either. A heavy-handed, overly, you know what I'm trying to say, and overly enforcing to the point of nanny-ish.
Yeah, but I think, Linda, what I'm saying is, because this is pretty complicated, and there are a lot of steps to it, that we're all in agreement that there should be some start to it, and that we look at it a little closer and what that could look like for our city.
That's just expressing my concern.
Sure. Yep. And I agree with that. I mean, I think there's a lot to it. So, Mr. Linwood, is this a matter of working on it over the course of several months, probably another work session on this and kind of drilling it down? And because it is very complicated, and there are people with mental illness, there's people that just don't want to comply. And I don't believe that the police should be involved with this in the beginning. So,
no, I think you're spot on that. I think this is an initial conversation, a continued conversation, but to go forward that staff can start to look at a potential ordinance and steps and draft something for council to review, to make sure that we're working on this hand in hand and to make sure that we're being, trying to gain that compliance, but at the same time, we're being sensitive and empathetic to individuals with not trying to be too overbearing. So I think there's a balance to be found here, and that's what we would like to work with the council and the staff to come to some sort of ordinance that gives the city the ability to actually act and be able to provide some services to residents when they have complaints, and to make sure that we're handling these appropriately.
Awesome. All right. Well, it has been a very productive 2 hours and 38 minutes. So we've gotten a lot done, And very just happy with everybody with this work session. Great input. So with that, I think all I have to really do is adjourn, and we won't see each other until the commission's next week. So does that sound good?
Perfect.
All right, everybody be safe out there. We're adjourned.
Thank you.
All right.
Take care.
See ya.
Bye now.